Hey everyone, Tim Ria here with Digital Health Live at the Digital Health Summer Summit, San Francisco. Super excited to see a good friend of mine and one of the most interesting people you'll ever meet in your lifetime. We have Andra Keay, Managing Director of Silicon Valley Robotics. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks Tim. It's been a wild ride since we first met back at, the Mega Startup Weekend at Microsoft a couple of years ago.
Mega Startup Weekend hosted with Startup America. And a big weekend of robotic startups over 24 hours or so.
That's right. It was the first time that we actually had robots in a software event. And it was really just the tip of the iceberg. It was kind of the start of the wave, because since then there have been robots at just about every event you can name. And we've seen this huge surge in hardware. The hardware is the new black, or hardware is the new software.
And then we connected up with Jill, and then there was a robotics fashion show at CES, and that's all blowing up. And then Google's been making huge acquisitions, and so it's a pretty interesting hot topic. What is your background? How did you get into the robotic space?
Well, I actually studied the whole culture of robotics, human-robot culture, and how robotics as a technology transitions into society, and how society impacts on robotics as a technology. And the best way to research something is to know what's happening in it, and the best way to know what's happening in it is to be in the middle of the space where all the robotics really is happening, which is Silicon Valley right now. And all of the events are in this explosion of hardware meets software, because software is nothing without the hardware to deploy it on, and hardware is nothing, not exciting at all, without the software to make it smart. And you add to that the communications technologies that we all have access to now, and we're starting to see dumb machines become smart, changeable, and communicative machines. And so for me, robotics is representative of the wave of the future, where automation and AI is transforming our entire landscape.
So Rise of the Machines, an explosion in the world of robotics. What was happening on stage?
Well, we did a little bit of an overview about robotics, the real figures, because as an industry it's still fairly small compared to, say, the size of health. But the potential in robotics is phenomenal, because it impacts every single industry. It's not just manufacturing and industrial automation, it's automation in everything. You know, we see this with Internet of Things, and it's just goes beyond there. I say by the year 2020, every house will have a robot, and it will be your house. In the same way, that we will be driving, or autonomous vehicles will be driving us around in the not too distant future. These are technologies that are coming into maturity. It's taken a long time, and I think robotics has been... Amara's law says that we always overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, but we really underestimate the potential of the technologies in the long term. And so robotics has been over the inflated hype cycle curve, and round about 2009, 2010, it was right at the bottom of the trough of disillusionment. But now we're seeing the real rise in actual robotics that can become a product, primarily in the B2B space, in all of the professional service areas, and certainly continuing in industrial automation and manufacturing, because someone's got to make all the stuff that we buy and use in our lives, ranging from our planes and cars to our phones and the rest of our accoutrements. That's all stuff that gets made, and we can't continue to keep up that trend without using more robots to make them. And it just then goes on into so many other areas. I personally find agriculture one of the really big growth areas that fascinates me, and robotic dairy farms are working right now where cows 24/7 are feeding, milking themselves with the help of machines. People don't need to be actively engaged. Now, many farmers remain actively engaged, but they don't need to get up at 4 a.m. They don't need to shovel the shit themselves. They can do the jobs that they want to do, and some of them say, look, this actually frees them up to become cow carers, because they still love the cows. They just hated some of the work. So it really is changing the paradigm in so many ways. And all the data from robot dairy farms says that the cows are a lot happier. They have higher milk yields, they have lower stress levels, and they have fewer illnesses. So I think there's a great potential in agriculture for robotics, and it will be interesting to see that extending in the health sector as well.
Yeah, in the health sector, I was at the HIMSS conference in Orlando at this whole future medicine space, and we saw the InTouch Health robot, and then I saw a total R2 unit that would deliver drugs securely from one room to the other in the hospital. What are you seeing in the telepresence healthcare robotic space?
I think that's one of the most mature spaces in robotics. We've had a lot of providers that have been developing their solutions for more than a decade. And so they're on to their second and third revision. They've got they're already deployed, so they're getting the feedback from customers. That's what I would call a mature application in the health space. We're seeing an increasing number of niche surgical robotics applications come up, where, Intuitive and the Da Vinci systems really led the way and blazed the trail, but they're kind of like the Swiss Army knife for robotics, or for robotic surgery. They do just about everything. There are so many more entries in that area who are doing, say, just a knee surgery for people with arthritis, where it's a precursor to a knee replacement and it's clearing a joint. Or you have an assistant in a hip replacement, or you have a robotic technology that's doing venipuncture. Very, very single purpose. I know actually one of the first robotics companies that was invested in the health space was a cosmetic company which was doing hair plug surgery.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Absolutely. And you think about it, that makes perfect sense. It's one of those jobs that's very, very repetitive. And
I might need to talk to those guys. No, I'm kidding.
yeah, I'd hate to see you with hair. That would,
especially with plugs. So I'm curious to see what's going on in the Convergence. We're seeing Oculus Rift come out where you can do VR. We're seeing nanotech, so nanobots and things like that. What are you seeing with the convergence of new technologies impacting and evolving the robotic space?
Okay, there is a lot of future growth. The future growth areas for robotics really relate to new materials, nanotechnology, and soft robotics. Soft robotics is probably the one that is the closest one to the curve, because these are still a way out. But soft robotics, in conjunction with the sort of systems we already have, will allow for better, more collaborative robotic systems.
The Italians were making like a octopus arm or something like that not too long ago.
And one of the companies right here in Silicon Valley or San Francisco is OtherLab, who are doing what they actually call Newbotics, and that's inflatable robotics. And the beauty of an inflatable robotic system or Newbotics system is that the power-to-weight ratio is just incredible. You can do so much more with a much cheaper and much lighter system. It's effectively an inflatable robotic system, an inflatable muscle. And the only trade-off is that it's not as precise as the more mechanical systems we have. But if you very cleverly utilize software, algorithmic corrections, and mechanical actuators in conjunction with a soft system, well, you're going to have something that's pretty nice. And I think it's already being put in place in rehabilitative robotics.
Interesting. So you had a startup competition recently. What was hot there?
We've just finished the robot launch startup competition. It's the first time we've run it. And it was a global competition, which was fantastic because I found it... we had more entries than I expected, and we had more entries from all over the world than I imagined was possible. You know, I knew that there was a lot happening in certain centers, and I did expect to get a lot of entries from the US, and I have to say the US was our dominant country for entries, but we had 19 other countries represented. That was stunning. Pretty much we covered all parts of the globe. And beyond that, we didn't just have a really great variety of countries represented, but we had an incredible range of robotics represented. So our entries ranged from consumer toy robots all the way through to welding machines and wall climbing robots. And in between we had robotics in the agriculture sector, we had drones in the inspection section, we had health robotics, and we had some component technologies, things like conductive fibers for tactile sensors. And I was just so delighted with the range, and we had a lot of input from some of the venture firms investing in robotics, and They evaluated all the entries, so I think it was a great win-win because every robotics startup that entered into the competition had a lot of feedback from the exact people that would fund.
So is money rolling into the space?
I think there is increasingly money rolling into the space, but it's tentative money. There aren't necessarily any. You wouldn't say that there are particular.
Like robotic funds yet?
There definitely are robotics funds. There are a number of robotics funds now. But I would say that we still see a lot of diversification in where people invest. And we see people who invest in one or two robotics companies and then in a range of other companies as well. So it's a lot to do with gathering market intelligence more than necessarily saying this is the one space to go in. And I think it's because robotics really does cover so many different areas that it's going to be in everything. It's almost going to be redundant to say robotics in another 10 years' time. Why would you say it? It's just technology.
So you're doing international delegation?
Yeah. Now, one of the flow-ons from the Global Robotics Startup Competition is that we're realizing Silicon Valley is actually the place that robotics startups need to spend some time in, or at least it really helps. So the UK is actually sending a mission over, they're arriving next week, of 7 really cool robotics startups. And that's actually funded by their Technology Strategy Board. And we've connected them with various robotics companies and VC firms, so they're doing a little tour from San Diego up through Silicon Valley to San Francisco, and we're having a great network party too, so you'll have to come along to the party.
I'm into that. Okay, well, let's wrap up here. Any last things you want to talk about before we leave?
Well, just to extend that support that we're starting to offer to startups from all over the world here, one of the things I realized is we need to expand what's happening in the seed stage funding for robotics. So I've just launched an angel list syndicate that is specifically for funding robotics startups at that very early stage. And I'm actually hoping that a few of the robotics funds will channel some of the money into the angel list syndicate so that they're getting early market intelligence into what's happening in this space.
Perfect. So how do people link up with you and everything that you're doing?
Well, Silicon Valley Robotics is svrobo.org, and I'm Andra Keay. If you look for me on svrobo.org or on Angel List, I'd love to talk to you.
So that's Andra, Andra Keay. A good friend. Good to see you. Awesome.
And I'll see you at the party.